My name is Victoria, and I'm 28 years old. 3 months ago, I walked away from my own wedding. Not because I didn't love my fiancé, not because I got cold feet, but because his family demanded I sign over my business empire to them as a wedding gift. They had no idea I was worth $7 million. I stood there in my wedding dress, holding a pen that would change everything. The man I loved was silent. His mother was smiling like she'd already won. And I realized that sometimes the people who claim to love you the most are the ones planning to take everything from you. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you how a girl who started with nothing built an empire that almost got stolen on her wedding day. Growing up, I learned that family meant sacrifice. My parents taught me that love required giving, until it hurt. They showed me that putting yourself first was selfish. For years, I believed them. I was wrong. The morning of my wedding, I woke up in my childhood bedroom, the same room where I'd cried myself to sleep countless times, where I'd planned my escape from a family that saw me as their personal ATM. My business started small, a little online, boutique selling handmade jewelry from my college dorm room. While my parents focused on my golden child brother, I was building something they couldn't see or understand. They never asked about my work, never showed interest in my success. To them, I was still the daughter who should be grateful for their attention. My fiancé David seemed different. He listened when I talked about my dreams. He celebrated my victories. He made me feel seen in ways my family never did. Or so I thought. The red flags started appearing 6 months before our wedding. Small comments about sharing everything in marriage, questions about my business finances, suggestions that family should come before profit. His mother, Margaret, was particularly interested in my success. She'd ask pointed questions about my revenue. She'd make comments about how family businesses should benefit everyone. I thought she was just being supportive. I thought she cared about my work because she cared about me. I was naive. The real revelation came 2 weeks before the wedding. David sat me down with his parents and 2 siblings. They had prepared documents, legal papers that would transfer my business ownership to a family trust. It's just a formality, Margaret explained with that same smile. Married couples share everything. This just makes it official. David nodded along. It protects both of us, Vic. Shows we're committed. I stared at the papers. My business wasn't just income to me. It was proof that I could succeed despite my family's neglect. It was security I'd built with my own hands. The trust would give David's family majority control. They'd decide how my company operated. They'd benefit from profits I'd earned through years of 18-hour days. What if I don't want to sign? I asked quietly. The room went silent. Margaret's smile faltered for just a moment. Then maybe you're not ready for marriage, she said. Her voice was steel wrapped in silk. David looked uncomfortable but didn't defend me. His silence spoke louder than words. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the girl who'd started selling jewelry from her dorm room. She'd been so proud of her first $100 sale. She'd never imagined building something worth millions. If you are watching this right now, drop a comment letting me know where you are viewing from. Before I tell you about this life-changing decision, hit like and subscribe to hear more real stories about family loyalty and betrayal that might just change how you see your own relationships. I realized I had 2 choices. Sign the papers and lose myself in someone else's family dynamics, or walk away from the man I loved to protect what I'd built. Neither choice felt right. Both choices would cost me something precious. But as I sat, in that childhood bedroom, surrounded by memories of feeling invisible, I knew what I had to do. I just wasn't sure I had the strength to do it. The next morning would change everything. The decision I made would reveal truths about love, loyalty, and what it really means to value yourself. Some lessons can only be learned the hard way. This was mine. To understand why that wedding decision was so difficult, you need to know about my family. The Johnsons were masters of emotional manipulation disguised as love. My father, Robert, was a middle manager who'd never taken risks. My mother, Linda, was a homemaker who lived through other people's achievements. They had 2 children who represented their split priorities. My brother Marcus was their golden boy. 3 years older, naturally charismatic, and gifted at telling people what they wanted to hear. He'd float through life making grand promises he never kept. But our parents saw potential where I saw patterns. Then there was me, the reliable one. The one who cleaned up messes and never complained. The one who got good grades, worked part-time jobs, and asked for nothing. I learned early that love was conditional in our house. Marcus got praise for trying. I got noticed only when I succeeded perfectly. When Marcus crashed his car at 17, I gave him my college savings to help with repairs. When he needed money for his wedding, I co-signed loans I'm still paying off. When he started his 3rd failed business, guess who provided the startup capital? My parents called it family loyalty. I called it survival. The jewelry business started, accidentally. My college roommate Sarah admired a necklace I'd made for myself. She asked if I could make one for her sister's birthday. I charged $20 and felt guilty for asking. Sarah wore it to a party where 3 other girls asked where she'd bought it. Within a week, I had 5 orders. Within a month, I had 30. I reinvested every penny, better materials, professional photos, a real website instead of social media, posts. While other students partied, I was learning about supply chains and customer service. My parents rarely asked about school. They never asked about my business. When I tried to share my excitement about landing a retail partnership, my mother changed the subject to Marcus's latest job interview. The invisibility hurt, but it also protected me. They couldn't take what they didn't know existed. By graduation, I was earning more than most entry-level positions. My parents assumed I was lucky to find any job. They had no idea I was employing 12 people. Moving out was my first act of rebellion. I found a small apartment across town and told them I needed independence. They thought I was being dramatic. The business grew steadily. Online sales expanded into boutique partnerships. Boutique partnerships became department store contracts. Department store contracts led to international orders. I hired designers, expanded product lines, and built relationships with suppliers worldwide. The shy girl who'd asked $20 for a homemade necklace was running a multi-million-dollar ad operation. But success felt lonely without family support. That's when I met David at a coffee shop near my office. He was warm, funny, and genuinely interested in my work. He asked thoughtful questions about my designs and celebrated my achievements. Dating David felt like finding a home I'd never had. His family seemed different too. The Millers were loud, affectionate, and inclusive. They welcomed me with hugs and genuine smiles. Margaret, David's mother, was particularly warm. She'd ask about my business with what seemed like genuine pride. She'd introduce me to friends as David's brilliant fiancé who runs her own company. I felt seen, valued, part of something bigger than myself. David's father, Frank, was quieter but kind. He'd share stories about building his own construction business. He understood the challenges of entrepreneurship in ways my parents never could. David's siblings, Karen and Michael, treated me like family immediately. They included me in inside jokes and holiday traditions. They made me feel belonging I'd craved my whole life. For 2 years, the Millers felt like the family I'd always wanted. They celebrated my successes, supported my decisions, and made me feel worthy of love. I should have recognized the difference between interest and calculation. between celebration and evaluation, between family and business opportunity. But I was so starved for familial affection that I mistook their inventory of my assets for genuine care. The truth about their intentions wouldn't become clear until they needed something from me, until my success became large enough to benefit them directly. Have you ever mistaken someone's interest in what you have for interest in who you are? The distinction matters more than you might think. The first crack in my fairy tale appeared 6 months before the wedding during a family dinner at the Miller's house. Margaret was serving her famous lasagna when she casually mentioned a friend whose daughter had smart business practices. She put everything in both names before marriage, Margaret said, cutting neat squares of pasta. Protects everyone involved. David nodded thoughtfully. Makes sense. Marriage is a partnership, right? I felt a small chill, but dismissed it. Couples discussed finances all the time. This was normal, healthy communication. But Margaret's questions became more frequent, more detailed. She'd ask about my suppliers, my profit margins, my expansion plans, always framed as motherly interest, but something felt different. You've built something amazing, she'd say. The whole family is so proud. The whole family, as if my business success belonged to all of them somehow. Meanwhile, my relationship with my biological family was deteriorating. Marcus had started another business venture, something involving cryptocurrency and big promises. He needed investors. Family should support family, my father said during one tense phone call. You've done well for yourself. Time to give back. I'd already given Marcus thousands over the years. Money I'd earned through sleepless nights and careful planning. Money that helped fund his lifestyle while I lived modestly and reinvested everything. I'm planning a wedding, Dad. My expenses are pretty high right now. The wedding David's parents are paying for? My mother's voice was sharp. While you hoard money like some kind of miser? They didn't know about my net worth, but they knew I was successful. In their minds, that meant I owed them something. Success was a debt to be collected by family. I started therapy around this time. Dr. Amanda Chen specialized in family dynamics and boundary issues. Our first session was eye-opening. Tell me about your role in your family, she said gently. I'm the responsible one, the problem solver. What happens when you don't solve problems? I couldn't answer. I'd never tried not solving problems. Dr. Chen helped me understand patterns I'd never questioned. The way my family treated my success as communal property. The way they framed their needs as my obligations. Healthy families celebrate individual achievement, she explained. They don't automatically claim ownership of it. But recognizing patterns and changing them were different challenges entirely. The pressure intensified as the wedding approached. Marcus's business was failing, and my parents were growing more insistent about family support. The Millers were asking more detailed questions about my company structure. Then David suggested we meet with a financial advisor to plan our married finances seemed reasonable, responsible adults planning their future together. The advisor, recommended by David's family, spent most of the meeting focused on my business assets. How to optimize our tax situation through strategic ownership transfers. It's quite common, he assured me. Married couples benefit from shared business structures. I felt like prey being circled by predators who smiled and called it help. That weekend, I drove to my old college to visit Sarah, now a successful lawyer in her own right. We sat in the same cafe where I'd first started taking jewelry orders. Something feels wrong, I told her. Everyone's suddenly very interested in protecting me financially. Sarah listened carefully. She'd known me through the early business struggles. She understood what I'd built and sacrificed. Who initiated these conversations? She asked. I realized the truth as I spoke. David hadn't suggested the financial advisor. Margaret had. The merger discussions weren't David's idea. They came from his family. Victoria, Sarah said carefully, has David ever shown this level of interest in business planning before? He hadn't. David was creative, spontaneous, and generally uninterested in financial details. This sudden focus on optimizing our assets felt completely out of character. Get a second opinion, Sarah advised, from someone who doesn't know your future in-laws. I left that weekend with uncomfortable questions. Was David genuinely interested in our financial future, or was he being influenced by his family's agenda? The distinction mattered more than I wanted to admit. I found myself noticing things I'd previously ignored. The way Margaret's eyes lit up when discussing my business growth. The way Frank asked detailed questions about my manufacturing processes. The way the entire family had opinions about my expansion plans. They weren't just welcoming me into their family. They were evaluating my contribution to their collective wealth. The realization was devastating and clarifying. I'd spent so long craving family acceptance that I'd confused genuine love with strategic interest. But understanding the problem and solving it were about to become very different challenges. 2 weeks before the wedding, everything came to a head. David asked me to join him for dinner with his parents. Family meeting, he called it with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. I arrived at the Miller's house to find the entire family gathered in their formal dining room. Margaret had prepared my favorite meal, which should have felt caring but somehow felt calculated. Victoria, sweetie, sit here. Margaret patted the chair beside her. We have something wonderful to discuss. Frank cleared his throat and produced a manila folder thick with legal documents. We've been working with our attorney to create something special for you and David. My stomach dropped, but I forced a smile. What kind of something? A family trust, David said, reaching for my hand. It'll protect both our assets and create opportunities for everyone. Margaret opened the folder with ceremony. This establishes the Miller Family Trust. All business assets get transferred into shared ownership. It's more tax efficient and shows real commitment to family unity. I stared at the papers. My business name was listed prominently. Victoria's Designs would become a subsidiary of the Miller Family Trust, with 5 trustees. David's parents, his 2 siblings, and David himself. Where am I in this structure? I asked quietly. You're the operational manager, Frank explained. You'll run day-to-day operations while the trust handles major decisions. Operational manager of my own company. The business I'd built from nothing would be managed by people who'd never worked a day in retail. This doesn't feel right, I said, my voice barely audible. Margaret's expression hardened slightly. Marriage is about joining families, dear. Keeping things separate shows you're not fully committed. David squeezed my hand. It's just paperwork, Vic. Nothing really changes except we're officially united. Everything would change. They'd control my company's direction, its profits, its future. I'd become an employee in my own business. What if I don't want to sign? The question hung in the air like smoke. Karen shifted uncomfortably. Michael studied his hands. David's grip on my hand tightened. Then maybe you need to examine your priorities, Margaret said. Her warm voice had turned ice cold. Family comes first, always. But it's my business, I said, finding my voice. I built it myself. With David's emotional support, Frank added, with our family's encouragement. Success is never really individual, Victoria. I looked around the room at faces I'd learned to love. People who'd welcomed me, celebrated with me, made me feel belonging. Now they sat like judges waiting for my surrender. I need time to think. The wedding is in 2 weeks, David said. His voice carried an ultimatum disguised as urgency. We need to finalize this before then. Why? The question escaped before I could stop it. Why does this need to happen? Before we're married. Margaret's mask slipped completely. Because married assets become complicated. This simplifies everything. Translation: they wanted my business locked down before I gained legal protections as David's wife. I stood up slowly, my legs shaking. I'm going home. Victoria, wait! David followed me to the door. Don't make this bigger than it needs to be. Bigger than what, David? Signing over my life's work to your family? To our family, he corrected. You'd be part of the trust too. As an employee, in my own company. He ran his hands through his hair, a gesture I'd once found endearing. My family loves you. They want to include you in everything. They want to include my business. There's a difference. Is there? His question was quiet, but it cut deep. I realized David genuinely couldn't see the distinction. To him, I was my business. My value was tied to what I could contribute financially. That night, I sat in my apartment staring at the wedding dress hanging in my closet. The beautiful gown I dreamed of wearing while marrying the love of my life. But was David the love of my life? Or was he someone who loved what my life could provide for his family? I called Dr. Chen for an emergency session the next morning. Her words were gentle but clear. Victoria, healthy love doesn't require you to diminish yourself. It doesn't ask you to surrender your achievements as proof of commitment. I knew what I had to do. I just didn't know if I had the courage to do it. The choice was simple but devastating. Sign away my independence or lose the man I thought I'd marry forever. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to be diminished by someone else's definition of love. Part 4. Word count, 798. Part 5. Aftermath and time jump, 600-800 words. The morning of my wedding, I woke up with absolute clarity. Not the peaceful clarity of a bride excited for her future, but the sharp clarity that comes from finally seeing truth. I called Sarah first. I'm not signing those papers. Good, she said without hesitation. What do you need? A lawyer, and maybe some courage. Sarah gave me contact information for a colleague who specialized in business protection. Then she said something I'll never forget. Victoria, the right person will love you enough to celebrate your success, not control it. I got dressed carefully, not in my wedding gown, but in the navy suit I'd worn when signing my first major retail contract. If I was going to fight for my business, I'd dress like the CEO I'd become. David arrived at my apartment looking handsome and nervous in his tuxedo. Ready for the best day of our lives? I'm not signing the trust documents. His face went through several emotions quickly. Confusion, disappointment, then something that looked like panic. Vic, we talked about this. It's just paperwork. Then why is it a requirement for marriage? He sat heavily on my couch. My family's really excited about this partnership. Partnership? David, they want to own my business. They want to include you. There's a difference. Is there? Because I'd become an employee while they make decisions about my company's future. We talked in circles for an hour. David genuinely couldn't understand why I was upset. In his mind, family sharing everything was natural and loving. I realized then that we were fundamentally incompatible. Not because he was evil, but because our values about independence, achievement, and family were completely different. I love you, I told him truthfully. But I won't marry someone who sees my success as his family's opportunity. David left angry. He returned an hour later with his mother. Margaret was furious but controlled. "You're making a mistake, Victoria. Marriage requires sacrifice." "Whose sacrifice?" I asked, because it seems like I'm the only one being asked to give up something significant. "You're being selfish." "I'm being self-preserving. There's a difference." The conversation ended with Margaret declaring I wasn't worthy of her son, that my coldness and greed proved I'd never truly loved David. Maybe she was right. Maybe I loved the idea of David more than David himself, but I knew I loved myself enough not to surrender my independence for someone else's definition of commitment. The wedding was called off that afternoon. Guests were notified. Deposits were lost. Hearts were broken. My parents were furious when they heard. "You had everything," my mother said during a painful phone call. "A loving husband, a welcoming family, financial security." "I already had financial security, Mom. I built it myself." "And now you have nothing." But I didn't have nothing. I had my business, my independence, and my self-respect. For the first time in my life, those felt like enough. The next 6 months were difficult. David and I didn't speak. His family spread stories about my selfishness around our social circle. Some friends chose sides, and many chose his. My own family remained unsympathetic. Marcus's latest business had failed completely, and they blamed my greed for not helping when he needed family support. But something interesting happened during those lonely months. My business grew exponentially. Without the distraction of wedding planning and family drama, I focused entirely on expansion. I hired a business manager to handle operations while I focused on design and strategy. I opened a flagship store in downtown. I launched an international shipping program. By the end of the year, Victoria's Designs had doubled in revenue. 1 year later, I was featured in Entrepreneur magazine as one of 30 under 30 business leaders to watch. The article mentioned my net worth, $7 million. The phone calls started immediately. David called first. "I saw the article. I'm proud of you." His pride felt hollow. Where was his support when I was building this success? My parents called next. "We had no idea you were doing so well." Of course they didn't. They'd never asked. Marcus called last. "I could really use your advice on my new business idea." Some patterns never change, but I had changed. The scared girl who craved family approval was gone. In her place stood a woman who understood that love shouldn't require diminishing yourself. Dr. Chen helped me see that walking away from that wedding wasn't just about protecting my business. It was about protecting my right to be successful, without apologizing for it. Today, I'm 30 years old and finally understand what healthy love looks like. It took losing everything I thought I wanted to find everything I actually needed. 6 months ago, I met someone who changed my perspective on relationships entirely. His name is Alex, and he's a teacher who's genuinely excited about my success. Not because he wants something from it, but because he loves seeing me thrive. When I told Alex about my business, his first question wasn't about revenue or growth. Potential. He asked what inspired me to start creating jewelry in the first place. He wanted to understand my passion, not evaluate my assets. Alex has never suggested combining our finances. He's never introduced me to his family as the successful businesswoman. He introduces me as Victoria, the woman he loves. The difference is profound. My business continues growing. We now have 3 retail locations and partnerships with major department stores worldwide. I employ 47 people who share my vision for accessible luxury. But success feels different now. It's not something I hoard or protect desperately. It's something I can enjoy because I'm with people who celebrate my achievements without claiming ownership of them. I've also learned to set boundaries with my biological family. I help when I choose to help, not because guilt demands it. I celebrate Marcus's successes when they're genuine, and I don't enable his failures. My parents and I have a cordial but distant relationship. They still don't fully understand my work, but they've stopped treating my success as their entitlement. The most surprising development came 8 months ago when David reached out through mutual friends. He wanted to apologize. We met for coffee in a neutral location. He looked older, more tired than I remembered. "I didn't understand what we were asking of you," he said quietly. "I thought love meant sharing everything." "It does," I replied, "but sharing should be voluntary, not coerced." David had married someone else 6 months after our canceled wedding. A nice woman who worked in his family's construction business. Someone whose assets complemented theirs naturally. "Are you happy?" I asked him. He considered the question, longer than I expected. "I'm settled. Content. But I think I finally understand what you meant about love not requiring you to disappear." We parted on good terms, but I felt no regret about my choice. David was a good person who'd been raised with problematic ideas about relationships and ownership. Sometimes love means walking away before you both become people you don't recognize. If you've stayed with me through this whole story, I want you to know something important. Your achievements belong to you. Your success doesn't create debt to people who claim to love you. Family should celebrate your victories, not claim them. Partners should support your dreams, not redirect them for their benefit. I know it's scary to stand up to people who've convinced you that their needs matter more than your boundaries. Trust me, I've been there. But here's what I learned. The people who truly love you will respect your success enough not to try controlling it. They'll be proud of what you've built, not resentful that they can't possess it. Have you ever been in a situation where someone claimed to love you but tried to diminish your achievements? Drop a comment and let me know. Your story might help someone else recognize their own patterns. If this story resonated with you, please like this video and subscribe for more real stories about family dynamics, boundary setting, and finding your own worth. What's your experience with family members who treat your success as their opportunity? Have you ever had to choose between love and independence? I read every comment, and your experiences help build a community of people supporting each other through these difficult decisions. Remember, you don't owe anyone your dreams just because they call it love. Real love wants you to thrive as yourself, not disappear into someone else's vision of who you should be. Sometimes the most courageous thing you can do is choose yourself, when everyone else expects you to choose them. Your worth isn't determined by others' approval. Your success isn't diminished by standing alone. And your dreams don't become less valuable just because other people want to claim them. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for seeing the difference between love and control. And thank you for believing that choosing yourself isn't selfish. It's necessary. If you learned something from my experience, share this video with someone who might need to hear it. Sometimes we all need reminding that our achievements are ours to protect and celebrate. Until next time, keep building the life you deserve, not the one others expect from you.